The Raptors organization as a whole obviously did not meet their expectations for this season, plummeting to the 7th worst record in the NBA. And there was a lot of players who fell well under their expectations and didn't perform well, which added to that. But there are definitely some players who exceeded their personal expectations and still had a great season. So in this video, we rank every single Raptors player based on their expectations and how that compared to reality. Let's get into it. What is up, NBA and Raptors fans? This is Amateur Hour Sports, the channel where you get NBA content with a focus on the Toronto Raptors at least 4 times a week: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday usually, but this week we did Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and today our Saturday video will be back to normal scheduling for next week. So if you like what you see from today's video and you want more of myself talking about the Raptors in content and videos just like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below to show support to the channel. We just hit 3,000 subscribers and we are on our way to 4,000 subscribers. Thank you guys so much for the support and love coming on the channel very recently. I really do appreciate it. So our video for today, again, we're gonna do another tier list like we did last week. You guys liked it, so we're gonna continue to do it. A tier list. We are ranking Raptors players individually, their expectations versus the reality they produced on the court. We are going to rank everybody who played for the Raptors enough this season. So even the guys who got traded, even the guys that we traded for are going to be involved in this tier list. So let's get into the list. So here you have it. This is a tier list that we are going to be using for today. Remember, we're going to be ranking the expectation of the individual player over the course of the season versus the reality that they actually produced on the court. So the categories that we have for this one is not enough games, much worse than expected, worse than expected, average, so they met expectations, better than expected, and greatly exceeded expectations. And for this one, just like the last tier list we did, we're going to fill out each category bottom to top. We're not going to go in order down here. So we're going to start with the bottom tier. And the only player on the not enough games tier is Jalen Harris. And the reason I put Jalen Harris here is because, he was great near the end of the season. He offered a lot of great stuff for the Toronto Raptors. However, there wasn't enough of a sample size for me to properly evaluate Jalen Harris. So let's move on to the much worse than expected tier. And remember, throughout this entire tier list, this is all my personal opinion based on how I evaluated their expectation and what I saw them produce throughout the course of the season. So make sure you're not going to agree with me. You're obviously not going to agree with me on everything, but make sure you hear me out before you get a little bit too angry. So much worse than expected. You know what? This can just be renamed the Baines tier. This is the Aaron Baines tier, the Aaron Baines level. He's not the only guy on this tier, but he's definitely the first guy on this tier. We asked a career backup center to take a step up as a starting center to replace Ibaka and Gasol after having a breakout great season with the Phoenix Suns, and ultimately he could not produce that. Looked a little bit sloppy on defense on the interior, really lost that 3-ball game that he developed last season, didn't have that finishing touch at the rim. There really wasn't a lot that Aaron Baines could offer us, and for that reason he's on the Baines tier. Now 2 other guys join him on the Baines tier. The first one is Matt Thomas and the second one is Terrence Davis. So again, hear me out. For Matt Thomas, you may say that, it's not his fault. It's on the coaching that he didn't meet expectations. You know what? Sure, I agree. I think that Nick Nurse is one of the biggest problems for Matt Thomas being on the Baines tier here, because at the start of the season, I was expecting Matt Thomas to break out as, that 3-point sniper for this team that maybe we have been lacking. Comes in, knocks down his threes. I thought he'd be, not a key guy off the bench, but a guy in the rotation every night. And I think that when he came in, his defense, obviously, we know it's not great. And his 3-pointers, I thought he could have hit a little bit more of his threes than he actually did. But, that didn't come to fruition. So he's on the Baines tier here. Now, Terrence Davis. We did a video on Terrence Davis last week. So if you want to hear my full in-depth thoughts about Terrence Davis, you can go ahead and check out that video. But ultimately, I had high expectations for Terrence Davis for this season. I thought that Terrence Davis would be a key, 7th or 8th guy in the rotation. And when he came on the court, you didn't know what you were going to get. He was so inconsistent and such a loose cannon. He fouled way too much, and I thought his decision making was quite awful on the court. He was much worse than I thought he'd be. Ended up getting a 2nd round pick for 2 guys that went undrafted. So You gotta like that as a return there, especially if Evan Fournier went for 2 second-round picks as well on the same day. But let's move on to the worse than expected tier. Now, the first guy that we're going to toss on the worse than expected tier is Stanley Johnson. Now, for some reason, a lot of you guys really like Stanley Johnson. I don't really know where that comes from. I personally don't see it with Stanley Johnson. Stanley Johnson is a guy who shoots 38% from the field, 32% from 3, and his defense, it's good, but I think he fouls a little bit too much. And other than that, there isn't really anything he offered, because his offense isn't there, his playmaking isn't there, his defense is all right, but it's not good enough to just completely not have an offensive game about him. And I thought that Stanley Johnson would step up into a bigger role, especially when there was the health and safety protocols. He had to step into a bigger role when 5 players were missing for 5 games, and he never quite stepped up, other than the one career high night that he had. But other than that, I don't see what you guys see in him. I'd be surprised if he was on the Raptors for next season. Now, the second guy on this tier is Rodney Hood. When we traded Norman Powell for Gary Trent and Rodney Hood, obviously you're excited about the Gary Trent aspect of the trade. But for Rodney Hood, I thought that, we got, okay, this is going to be a little bit of wing scoring to help us on the bench. He's not great, but that's a little bit of scoring. And I think Rodney Hood played well in 1, maybe 2 games for the Raptors. And other than that, he was pretty poor. I know he was injured quite a bit, but other than that, there was really nothing to like about Rodney Hood's game, and he was worse than I thought he would be. Absolutely. Now, the next guy on this tier, it's really sad that I have to put him on this tier. I will go to my grave defending Pascal Siakam. However, I had good expectations from this season to follow up that All-Star season. Now, he didn't quite hit those. Does that mean he didn't have a good season? No, I thought Pascal Siakam had a great season. He's kept his field goal percentage the same as last season, as well as his rebounding and his assists. And the fact that his 3-point percentage regressed, but his field goal percentage stayed the same, just showcases how good and how much better his finishing has gotten at the rim, while also adding in that mid-range game, which usually takes down your field goal percentage. It still stayed the same, because Pascal Siakam is a great player, just didn't quite hit the expectations that I had for him this season. Now, the fourth guy, again, hear me out, you may not agree with this. Malachi Flynn is on the worse than expected tier. And the reason for that is because, even though he finished the season playing very well, I feel like at the start of the season, he was so much worse than I thought he'd be. Coming in as a first-round pick, I thought he would slide into, a decent spot in the rotation, but wow. He was very bad at the start of the season in terms of his shooting, could not knock down any of his jump shots. He just wasn't really producing anything that was noteworthy for this Toronto Raptors team. Went down to the G League, still came back up, and, still wasn't tremendous, was trending more towards average there. But when he ended the season, he was playing great basketball. He was playmaking very well. He was starting to knock down his shots. Always had that great defense, but the start of the season, he just needed a little bit longer than I expected to get settled into the NBA. Now, do I think that he's a bad player? No, it's just my expectations were there. He just did not quite hit them. Will he hit them next season? I hope so. I expect him to continue where he left off this season. Now, let's go into our average tier. And the first guy on this one is DeAndre Bembry, who came in, didn't quite hit expectation with the Hawks. Maybe the Raptors can get something out of him. I thought he'd be a good ball handler. It wouldn't offer a ton of scoring, would offer us some decent defense. And, average is a good word to describe DeAndre Bembry. He's about an average NBA player, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. You need those type of guys on your roster. DeAndre Bembry is a guy we have on a roster who's average, and that's absolutely fine. We'll probably take that $1.9 million team option and have him on the team. That's cheap. I think he's worth it. Good guy to have on your team, so average is fine for him. Next guy in the average tier is Fred VanVleet. Now, for Fred VanVleet, start of the season, he would have been up here. He was phenomenal to start of the season, very nearly got himself into an all-star team, but then after he got COVID, really ruined his motor, his respiratory system, and his physical attributes. He was worse than expected. So I think that a good place to balance out is that he was really good to start, didn't do so well, even though it wasn't his fault. He had COVID, even though it wasn't quite his fault. It does kind of balance out in the middle for me, and I put him in the average tier. I think that's a fair assessment. Now, next guy is Kyle Lowry. Sure, didn't play a ton, but when he did play, I thought that Kyle Lowry produced exactly what I was expecting to produce. Stats don't tell everything about Kyle Lowry, even though statistically he was quite good this season and actually upped his field goal percentages compared to last season. So, even though it was still kind of good, it wasn't bad. It was about what I was expecting. I'll put him in the average categories. Now, let's get to our last player in the average category, and that is Paul Watson. Now, Paul Watson, I don't think had a great season, but it's about what I was expecting of him. He is a decent scorer. He's got a really nice shooting stroke from 3. Defense is certainly lacking, and I don't know if Paul Watson is going to be a guy that the Raptors will have on their roster for the start of next season, but Paul Watson produced about an average season in terms of what I was expecting him to produce. Now let's get into the better than expected category, and the first guy on this is OG Anunoby. Now OG Anunoby had a sensational season, but the reason he's better than expected rather than greatly exceed expectations is because I hold OG Anunoby to such a high standard, and he still exceeded the expectations. Broke out as, a much better scorer this season, even turned into a little bit of a 3-level score that we'll have to monitor for the 23-year-old if he can continue to produce like that. The 3-point percentage is fantastic. His defense even maybe it got better because now not only can defend the 1 through the 5, he can play as the 1 through the 5, literally playing as the center, guarding guys like Nikola Jokic, one of the best, if not the best, on-ball defenders in the NBA. I love having OG Anunoby on this team. Now, the next guy on the better than expected is Gary Trent Jr. When we traded for him, I thought we were getting more of like a 3 and D type of guy, but he is much more than that. He is a ball handler, a guy who can create his own shot, and if he really fine-tunes the shot selection and consistency with his ability to create shooting, this could be a guy that the Raptors have been missing. He has a very high ceiling, but he's also got like a pretty low floor. He's got to be able to continue to develop his game, to develop his smarts and intelligence as a basketball player to get to that high ceiling. And the next guy in the better than expected is Freddie Gillespie. For Freddie Gillespie, we signed him on a 10-day contract, and I was worried his fate as a guy on a 10-day contract would be the same as the likes of Dante Hall, who didn't play any games, or Henry Ellenson, who only got 2 games and we didn't bring back, but showcase that he could get that second 10-day contract and still continue to produce great things, and got a 2-year NBA contract, and he absolutely deserved it. He has shown he belongs in the NBA, where I expect him to just kind of be a guy we had on a 10-day to fill out the space on the roster for a cluster schedule. So congratulations to him. Now let's get into the last greatly exceeded expectations category. The first guy has to be Chris Boucher. For Chris Boucher coming into this season, I thought he would just be a guy to have in the rotation who had a bit of unique skill set that could offer some blocks, maybe some interior scoring, but wow, he broke out as a sniper from 3, and with his very high release point on his 3s, it makes it very difficult to guard. He looked great on defense on the interior as well as the perimeter. He was blocking a ton of shots, playing good defense, not cluttering up the space on offense because he could get out there and shoot the 3. People didn't realize how good he was at shooting 3s, so he was always open to hit those wide open 3s. If he wasn't injured, certainly is in the 6th man of the year and MIP conversation, and I was not expecting that. Maybe had some outside chance at MIP, but wow, was way better than I thought Chris Boucher would be this season. Now, next guy is Khem Birch. Khem Birch was signed from Orlando after getting waived, and he was like a 5-point per game, 5 rebound per game player there. And I thought just be, okay, at least it's a tall guy who can be a proper center for this team. But he started playing like an all NBA type center. Was putting the ball in the basket constantly, getting a ton of rebounds, playing great defense. He was exactly what this team was missing. I only wish we had him for the full season. What's crazy? He started to develop that 3-point game as well. He averaged a career high in 3-point attempts with the Raptors, yet still averaged a career high in field goal percentage. So there is good things for Khem Birch. I hope that he wants to stay, and I'm sure the Raptors want to keep him. Now, last guy, Norman Powell. Still miss him. He was phenomenal this season. After a rough start, he broke out into almost all-star type of statistics, man. Like 22 points per game on 50, 40, 80 plus shooting. He was sensational, and he's a guy who absolutely stepped up this season when there were injuries, health and safety protocols, and he was well beyond anything I was expecting Norman Powell to produce over the course of this season. I was so happy with the way he played. It was sad to see him go, but I understand the decision making. I'm happy for him. You know, hopefully he gets the bag in the summer because he earned it. He was phenomenal for the Raptors this season and greatly exceeded my expectations. So that is it for this tier list. Here is the list. Again, agree, disagree. I want to hear what you guys think. You know, if you disagree with me, try to hear me out, see my thought process, but I also want to see your opinions as well. So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this tier list video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button to help us reach some new viewers, get some new viewers to the channel, help us with the algorithm on YouTube. Also, check out our Twitch, twitch.tv/amateursports, where we watch along a ton of NBA playoff games and do other video game content on the side. Use the button next to my head to subscribe to the channel. We're on our road to 4,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for the great support that has come in after hitting 3,000 this week. We are well on our way to 4,000 subscribers already. You know, if you guys like this tier list, we will continue to do them, so stay tuned for more videos like that in the future. Other videos you want to check out are here, and always remember, at the end of the day, I believe what I say, and if you disagree, that is okay. We'll see you again next time for another video.